All right, why don't we get going? Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for our 10DLC webinar. Your weekend will now be complete, having the knowledge of 10DLC heading into it. Couple of things of note, there aren't a ton of slides here. We want to make this interactive. So please use that Q&A button in front of you to submit questions. And we'll get to those for sure by the end. And if there are any that make sense for any given slide, we'll hit them up, right during the presentation. So we will go ahead and get going. So the agenda for today, we'll get introduced. In case some of you don't know us, we've got a 10DLC overview, just the basics of the what, the why, and the how. How does the process work? That is 10DLC, specifically around registration. What are the upsides and the downsides of complying or not complying? What should you expect out of your texting provider? And then looking ahead, what should you be doing about 10DLC and getting ready? So I'm the CEO of TextUs and have been with the company for about a year, and happy to be a co-presenter with Eric, who I'll let introduce himself.
Yeah, Eric Huguenin, Chief Revenue Officer here at TextUs. I've been in the staffing space for 12 years now, always on this side though, on the vendor side, and I've been at TextUs now for 6.5 years.
All right, so a little bit of background material. So we're talking about application of person texting, which is a bit of a formal term that is used by the carriers and CTIA. Really, we're talking about business to consumer texting. A2P, or business to consumer text messaging, is accomplished three ways. One, through short codes, two, with toll-free numbers, and three, with local phone numbers. And the 10DLC program specifically only applies to local phone numbers. So what is 10DLC? Well, first of all, it's an acronym, as you could probably tell. It stands for 10-digit long code, but really it's shorthand for a formal program that's been designed by the wireless carriers, most notably AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. And the whole intent is to improve the application-to-person texting experience. And 10DLC registered businesses and campaigns, so basically those participating in the 10DLC program, gain access to exclusive A2P messaging routes inside carrier networks that improve deliverability and throughput. Now, if you're like me, you might be a little bit skeptical about marketing-like terms, which this kind of smacks of. I will tell you though, given that we're skeptical on your behalf, we have actually done some testing of messages that go over P2P routes, which is person to person, which is if you text your mom, for example, like that's going to be one-to-one, person to person, that's going to go over a P2P route, versus texting from a platform like TextUs or anybody else out there that goes through that ecosystem. It goes on a different route, and I'll tell you, we've tested both, and the deliverability benefits are their material. I'll put it to you that way. And so just having sent, we send millions of texts a month, and we will tell you, because we validated that the A2P routes truly do have benefit there.
So when we look at this, so why 10DLC? And why is this happening? Why are the carriers doing this? The first thing they said when we first heard about this earlier this year, and it's been something that's been around actually for over 2 years. Verizon Wireless implemented this almost 2 years ago, and now the rest of the carriers, AT&T, T-Mobile, and the rest that are out there are coming around to it. And their goal is to protect the consumers, protect their users, and to make this kind of the preferred way of business communication as well. We're all familiar, originally text messaging was a short code that we're getting text from. And that's one thing we'll be talking about a little later, and how that's transitioned away. And so there's a few reasons why. One is from a profit reason for the carriers themselves, as well as that was really seen as business texting. Well, now that 10DLC or long digit texting, like what TextUs and other providers put out there, is coming around. This is the preferred way. People don't like those short codes. You see it as spammy right away. And so it's one reason they're going to be deprecating shared short code, which we'll talk about. So why is this important? One of the reasons they're doing that is you get an extremely higher response rate when you're using long code, when you're using that local phone number, whether it's your business direct line that's out there, or if it's one of your just general number for your office or whatever it may be, you're going to get a much higher response rate compared to any other number you'd be texting from, whether it's short code, toll-free, shared short code. And so one reason they put this out there is they want to also protect the people we're reaching out to. There were those of us, right? Like there's that car warranty story. Everybody's got the phone calls. Everybody's got the emails. Everybody's got the letters. We don't want them to start texting us now as well. And this is going to protect those consumers from businesses like that reaching out. Yet it's going to yield that high response rate for those of us that do follow the guidelines of what they're looking for. And it's going to support good businesses and good actors and keep the bad eggs out from ruining it for the rest of us that are using this across our business profiles. And one thing to note on this too, this is actually put in by the carriers themselves. So the CTIA is the body that's a self-governing body by the carriers. This isn't FCC. This is not TCPA, which is your Telephone Consumer Protection Act. This is the actual CTIA. This is the carriers themselves putting this in place to protect their consumers from getting overspammed by businesses.
Yeah, I give the carriers a lot of credit for taking the initiative and self-policing. Like CTIA is a great example. It's been in place for, like over a decade now. The other entity that you'll hear more about is a group called the Campaign Registry. We actually have a very good relationship with them. And, we were a bit skeptical at first too. And then we got to know the guys over there at the Campaign Registry, and they know what they're doing. They've got the infrastructure set up to support this. And it's really just the next chapter that the mobile carriers are putting in place to just make sure that this great communication medium that we have out there stays great and doesn't become like the Wild West that email is, for example. There are some other examples of just really good registration and content management processes out there that the carriers are trying to model, and we expect it to be implemented to great effect here. So what is required to participate in 10DLC? Well, there's really four things at the highest level. The first couple have to do with registration, and then the 3 and 4 have to do really about ongoing management and execution. But first and foremost, you've got to register your company, or your brand, as they call it, which really is registering your legal entity. It requires an employer identification number, which is the equivalent of a social security number for a business. So you've got to register at that level. And there's a verification that occurs with your EIN that's required for approval by the carriers. And the carriers, each carrier that participates in the registration process will receive your brand score that comes about after you register your legal entity. The second step is registering your campaign. So once your brand or legal entity is registered, you'll register at least one campaign, because the campaign basically tells the carriers what you will be using texting for. An example might be marketing. It might be sales, customer care. There's a list of use cases that you register under that tells the carriers how you will be using texting over their networks. Now, the important thing here is you'll get an ID. It's a unique identifier for your brand and your campaign, and that ID gets assigned to your phone numbers. And then it gets registered deep in the SMS ecosystem, so that when they see that phone number, they know what that phone number is being used for and by what brand. Now, once we've got the registration set up, there's some things that texting providers like us do in conjunction with you. We partner with you to practice good opt-in management. So proactively asking for consent, and then sending text to those who have opted in, like opt-in rates or opt-out rates for your texting campaigns or your texting communications will be closely monitored, as it is today. So it's really no different. And then just send good content. So more specifically, there are very specific flags you want to avoid that will cause customer complaints or trigger content filters, such as shortened links, illegal words, don't swear over text, or use any other specifically prevented words, and things like all caps. One thing to note is the registration deadline had been promoted for months, is June 1st. This is the hard deadline, not the early registration date, but the hard date of June 1st has been moved, in case you didn't hear about that. The new deadline has not been announced, but will be announced later with a minimum of 30 days advance notice, which, by the way, isn't a lot of time. So you want to, here at TextUs, we're still approaching this as if we need to get folks registered by the 1st. And so we're just going to press on to get ahead of things.
There was a good question that came in from Sarah there that talked about this. So how's this different than what we're doing now? Now they're using TextUs specifically, but if you look at like a lot of the providers that are out there, so what's different with this now? A lot of providers are going to register you, or they're going to try to register you through their providers they use, whether it's Twilio or Bandwidth. But what's important here when we look at this registering is these different use cases, right? So you're going to have what we call maybe mixed messaging, and that may be a recruiter or a salesperson, how they're reaching out to customers or potential clients. There are emergency type campaigns, right? There are different campaigns that may be used specifically for billing. So we're going to register these different use cases. And why is that important? Is it also means there's different throttling rates. So one thing we'll talk about shortly is these different use cases have different speeds at which you can send, sometimes exponentially faster than we can send now, and stay completely compliant. So it's really important for whoever uses a provider that they're actually registering separate campaigns for your business if that's needed. Some businesses, one use case is perfect. But other businesses, we may set up multiple use cases because it's important to have those different ones, and registering exact examples down to even the exact specific kind of text messages that you're going to be sending out. So getting down to that granularity is going to be really important, because one thing Martin mentioned is around that opt-out piece. So both opt-outs and blocks are going to become significantly higher filters by the carriers. Like right now, if you're using a platform to send out text and you get a mid-90s deliverability, it's great. And opt-outs are important. They kind of look at it. Opt-outs become exponentially important in the new platform. If you start seeing a high opt-out rate, they can completely block you. You could get a 99% block by some of the carriers. So these are things when you're looking at providers, why is it important? Why is it important to follow this compliance? Because, what would happen to your business if you got a 99% block? It could be detrimental to a business that's using this as their primary way of outreach to customers. Hopefully that answered the question that came in.
Well, now's a good segue into the next slide. So this is what the registration process looks like. But I'm going to start, I think I'll start with the end, which is at the end of the day, if we do our jobs well at TextUs and other providers like us do our jobs well on your behalf, you're not really going to see an impact to your texting capabilities. And here's why. So we're registered, as you probably have guessed or surmised by now. We're actually partners with the campaign registry guys and have a regular dialogue with them. So you'll see our logo on their page. And so we've been talking to them for a couple months now in pretty great detail. As part of that, we're registered as a campaign service provider or texting provider. But so that's a really important step one, because now we can register our customers, for example, on your behalf. So all we'll need from you is some basic information, including your employer identification number that you'll want registered. You'll provide that to us. We'll register you on your behalf. We'll get a brand score that determines your message throughput limits to some degree. And then once we register your brand, most of you will just require one campaign to get registered. We'll do that for you. It's a fairly straightforward, but it's a multi-step process that we will take care of for you. And the result is we'll get you a campaign ID we'll get the limits, the throughput limits associated with that. And both the brand registration as well as the campaign registration will determine what your message caps and throughput limits are. We're sharing that with you to be transparent and help educate. One of the benefits of this registration process is you'll end up with throughput limits and message caps that are beyond what you'll actually need, because you're being above board about things, we're registering. And so there's a benefit of gaining the trust of the carriers. And that benefit is really good throughput limits. We were really pleasantly surprised at the throughput limits that we saw. So that's why we say that you're not going to see any changes to your texting capabilities. As a matter of fact, some of you might see your throughput limits go up to the extent that you even push those limits, which is pretty rare. One other insight I'll share is usually bigger companies that are associated, and they can pull this information through the employer identification number. It's basically like a background check, kind of like a FICO score, if you will. They've got a lookup process that the campaign registry uses based on your employer identification number. Generally speaking, the bigger the company, the more throughput or the higher the cap that you get, which kind of makes sense because you've got more employees, and usually there's a correlation between number of employees and the amount of text you send out.
One other thing I'll note on that, it's important for companies that are out there that are using multiple providers too. Say you're using TextUs, you're using maybe a HubSpot, and you're using HireMaya, or you're using some other marketing platform. If you register 3 separate vendors, you still get that same throughput as a business. So let's just say your number that your business can send in a day is 10,000 text messages. Again, I'm making up an arbitrary number right now. So if your vendors don't communicate, which most of those wouldn't, you could be hitting or exceeding what that said throttling rate is. So it's really important when you're looking at who you're going to use. Are you spread across multiple vendors? How does that look? Where's your score land? Where's your throttling land? That's going to be a really important part of this whole process for businesses that are out there that are using multiple mediums for that outreach process. It's a good reason to work on potentially consolidating to one, or working with platforms that can integrate well with other partners that are out there as well.
All right. Well, what's the upside? We've hinted at this before, but to be explicit about it is your deliverability will improve significantly, like really significantly, versus the alternative, which is not registering. We'll talk a little bit about that in the downside, but like we mentioned, the A2P routes are real. We've validated the results just in doing our own A/B testing. And you'll be pleasantly surprised, I think, at the deliverability that you get. If you're a TextUs customer, you've been seeing those deliverability rates already because we use these A2P routes. And for those that don't, you can look forward to that upside as well. It's actually pretty significant to see. You'll get higher throughput, but like I said, most folks don't put the pedal to the metal and just really gas things from a texting standpoint. Most folks are using it for some marketing campaigns. They use it for conversational texting. And so in our experience, it's pretty rare to see folks push that limit. But if you do push the limit, you'll be pleasantly surprised, we think, at the throughput that the carriers do allow, because you're formally part of the program. And then there's a transparent ecosystem, which keeps the bad actors out, which is what, part of what we all want here. We want to preserve this. I mean, it's just a really terrific communications medium at the end of the day. It just allows you to engage so much better with candidates, employees, and consumers. And we want to keep that specialness in place, and the transparent ecosystem allows us to do that. The analogy that we like to use here at TextUs is, if you think about email, I mean, email is just the Wild West. It's just all kinds of riffraff that comes into people's inboxes. But the places that do registration really well are things like paid search ads, and display ads. There's actually a registration process you've got to go through. Like, you cannot turn on an ad instantly. It's like, it's got to go through an approval process. They make you take out bad words or words you shouldn't be using. You got to get your content approved. And if you think about it, you might see some ads that are like in bad taste, but you don't see like bad ads. You know what I'm saying? So I think like the advertising ecosystem, having been in advertising tech for a while, I see a lot of similarities here, and it's been done to great effect in the ad tech world, and we see parallels here with texting, which is why we're promoting this, and we think it's just a good thing for the texting industry.
I would say additionally on the upside, for those of you who use our platform or other texting platforms that are out there, if you're sending out links and sending links in mass, you tend to get a much higher block rate, and you can quickly get blocked by the carriers. Now, they are going to still continue to block if you're using a bit.ly or one of those link shorteners. But with this, in the approved use case, if you're using specific that, we can now start using links in mass upon our outreach. So if you're using a campaign functionality or broadcast functionality through the tool you're using, this will actually be, if you're using that specific use case, whether it's marketing or whatever it may be and how it's registered, we can start to send those things in mass. So it's going to actually allow us to open up a lot of doors with how we're using the outreach within text that before the carriers shut that down right away. You'd get blocked almost immediately when you started sending out those type of things in mass. So there's some big benefits there once your brand's approved and we're following within these guidelines.
All right. So here's the potential downside of not complying. Blocked messages. So AT&T has indicated, quote unquote, it's in quotes because we don't know in actuality to the extent to which traffic will be blocked, but they certainly stated that there's a distinct possibility that unregistered traffic, otherwise known as gray route traffic or traffic that's going over P2P routes that really should be A2P, will get blocked by AT&T. T-Mobile has taken a different stance. T-Mobile has said, they haven't come out and said we'll block you, but man, their list of fines is something I don't want to be familiar with, at least in practice. There's some pretty stiff fines, fines for circumventing the A2P routes. There are fines for just flat out disregard of acceptable texting practices to the tune of like $10 a message. So pretty stiff fines. You don't want to get familiar with that. And then there's also a downside of just getting deregistered or your campaign getting revoked, which obviously if you don't have an approved campaign, remember that campaign ID is like a real thing that gets associated with your phone number deep in the SMS ecosystem. And it's that phone number to campaign ID pairing that basically allows you to go through the networks on a registered basis. So if your campaign gets deregistered, your campaign ID gets deregistered, and now your phone numbers by implication get deregistered from 10DLC because it loses the campaign ID. So what should your texting provider, otherwise known as a CSP, be doing? This is our opinion, just because we're literally right in the thick of this, and so these are our insights that we want to share with you. But what we think is best practice here for CSPs is automating the registration process. It's complex, it just is, and it's by necessity and design. It involves multiple parties that results in campaign IDs being mapped to phone numbers. And so manual processes are just going to lead to errors, which, the errors are going to cause delays or blocks. And so to the extent that we can automate this, we are 100% going to automate it. The other thing too is by us automating a complex process, it makes it simple for you. And so the design goal here is to basically have you give us certain brand information, like your EIN. We have to get that. And you can have multiple employer identification numbers for one companies, for those companies that are larger. We can register as many of those as you want. Get a little bit more information from you, like what do you plan on using texting for? And that's it. That's it. That's how simple we're going to make this and automated. We're going to make this so that we just want to make sure that we just get it right. And so we have APIs directly that we're writing to directly to the campaign registry, which is the source, right, for this registered information, as well as our own direct APIs to our SMS providers. So automation is key, because we're dealing with a lot of information, and we want to make sure that we get it right. And machines are better at getting it right than humans. Providing texting best practices. Carriers are continuously fine-tuning their proprietary content filters, and their content filters are different. We have noticed different behavior among the carriers of what tends to get blocked versus not. Now, there's a lot of similarity, don't get me wrong, but there's also some variations that we're continuously observing and synthesizing and passing to our customers. You really want your CSP to be doing that. If you've treated your CSP a bit transactionally before, this is an opportunity for you, I think, to get together with them on a periodic basis, whether it be a QBR. We do QBRs with our customers to make sure we're sharing insights back and forth on a quarterly basis. It might be semi-annual, maybe it's annual, depending on your business. But I would engage with your CSP on a regular basis to make sure that they're sharing learnings with you in terms of just how to write the best content and make sure that it has high deliverability. Automating the opt-in management process. So Eric mentioned before, like the opt-in standards are going to get higher with 10DLC. And so there's less margin for error there. And whenever you hear less margin for error, you want to be automating things so that you get by with the lower error margin. So making sure that when someone opts out, it's super clear that contact opted out. You've got automation in place in your texting platform that just automates the collection of that opt-out data and tags that contact that opted out. And then the other piece of automation that's key here is you want an API, ideally, between your texting platform and your system of record, typically a CRM, that is the source of truth, the single source of truth for opt-out data or opt-in data. And you want that to be totally automated because there's a lot of contacts, there's a lot of information to keep track of, and a little bit of opt-out data, can get you sideways with the carriers. And then optimizing deliverability and masking complexity. Messaging throughput, I give the carriers credit for unifying in a lot of ways, but there are still variances in terms of content filtering. There are variances in terms of rate limiting, message caps, and you really want your CSP to really be on top of the differences there, because you actually, for example, Eric kind of alluded to this earlier, you may hit a message cap with one carrier before you hit a message cap with another carrier. Let's just pretend for a minute that you're one of those companies, or you've got a month where you've just got to get a lot of stuff out, a lot of messages out. You may bump into a cap with one carrier before you bump into a cap with another carrier. And if your CSP is really paying attention to this, you won't even know. Right? Because what we'll do is we'll say, oh, they hit their cap there. We're going to queue the messages, and then we're going to gracefully retry once the cap refreshes, for example. So you really want that variability. Honestly, you don't even want to know about it. You want your CSP to take care of the complexity, both in regard to the registration, both in regard to the opt-in and opt-out, but then also with the carrier differences. So we just covered the CSP. What should you be doing this. This is new, it's complex, you know, and it's understandable that, you know, that not all texting vendors out there have their heads wrapped around this. I can't blame them. There's a lot to get your head wrapped around. So if your CSP has not started a dialogue with you, I would reach out to them and start the dialogue with them, because it requires a roadmap of process and technology that's going to allow you with your CSP partner to get through this. And so there's a pretty good chance they're probably thinking about this and thinking about how to implement this. I'd proactively say, hey, I'm interested in 10DLC. Texting is important to our company. You know, let's get a date on the calendar as to when you can talk about the process and the technology that's going to allow us to get there. Some of you are bigger and you use more than one CSP. We have a pretty big, we have a segment of our customers that are fairly large, and this is common. So we recommend two things here, or one of two things. Have a CSP strategy where you've got, you know, CSPs that map to certain legal entities and their campaigns, because not all CSPs are made equal. Some CSPs do certain things better. Other CSPs do other things better. And I think you really want to be intentional about mapping the CSP's capabilities to that of your legal entities and how those legal entities are going to use texting in a world with 10DLC. The other one we recommend here is for those of you where texting is just business critical. So for example, you know, staffing and recruiting, talent acquisition, shift management, like you run your business in part due to texting. We would actually recommend that you consider consolidating under one CSP. Particularly CSP that's going to be ahead of the game process and technology wise. And here's why. Eric mentioned it earlier. You've got one brand, right? And that one brand is going to get registered in 10DLC. There are a lot of capabilities and risks tied to that one brand and the campaigns that are under that one brand. And so you want to minimize compliance risk. You want a CSP that's going to be able to manage carrier variability and deliverability across your various entities and across your various campaigns. And you also want to maximize your benefits. And so in the example I gave earlier, where it's like, oh, let's say you're pushing the limit 1 month and you run into a cap, right, with one of the carriers. Well, if you're using two CSPs, you really don't know which CSPs might bring you over that cap. And so there's a visibility and management piece to this that's important, we believe, when you consider your business critical texting needs.
So what's the impact of 10DLC on business texting? You know, it's going to make it more conversational messaging, right? You know, texting is on the rise. In 2022. Businesses, they believe, will send over 2.7 trillion text messages. For those of you that have been using TextUs, for example, this time last year, we were seeing a significant increase with COVID. We saw about 20 million texts sent in December of 2019 and about 30 million. We're over 40 million now when we look at March. So in less than a year, we've doubled our volume. We haven't doubled as a business in that time period. It just goes to show you how much more our customers are using that within their outreach. There was a HubSpot stat that emails through COVID all last year, with all of us working from home, as you can see by our backgrounds, emails went up almost 200%, but the response rates went down by almost 50%. So you're going to have to double your outreach to get the same result that you were before. It's because email and phone calls just aren't as effective now, right? And we know text message is a great way to reach out. And so that, I think this whole piece around 10DLC, and it's been accelerated because of that. You know, it's one of those things where texting for a lot of businesses now, as we said before, you know, it used to be a nice to have, and now it's a need to have. You know, think about that, how business critical, as Martin mentioned earlier, is it to your business around texting. It's one reason why it's really important when you're looking at who you use as a provider, as a business, is making sure they're staying within compliance, that your business doesn't get shut down, doesn't get that block. Because what happens if you get a day block, a week block, a month for your entire business, where before maybe it might have been one account, they might block your entire business that's been registered. That's the measure, the extremes they may go with this to protect those consumers. So it's going to be really important that you're using trusted numbers and trusted providers for this whole piece when you're doing that. Making sure conversational messaging is a part of it. You're watching your opt-outs. You're making sure that your provider is paying close attention to that, because it's going to be crucial to your business, and making sure you're just doing that whole one-to-one personalized outreach. That's never going to go away. It's a really important part of it, is make it conversational, make it something that a text you would send to your significant other, so you can get a response. You can engage with that individual when you're sending it. Maybe not to the level of your significant other, but you know what I mean. And I think that plays heavily into, within our base at TextUs, we work over 80% of our customers are within the corporate HR and staffing space. And the interesting part about this is I think it's going to be a huge benefit. I'm actually excited about 10DLC. We at TextUs have been very regulation heavy for years now and talked a lot about compliance. And so for our customers, they're expecting huge growth this year. SIA actually came out with, and for those of you not in staffing industry analysts came out with a new report this week. They're expecting a minimum of a 12% growth this year, that the staffing industry as a whole will be above where it was prior to 2020. So we're expecting big growth here. So there's going to be a big growth, and we're seeing that as well within our corporate HR customers and some of our sales and financial customers. We're seeing large growth there. So with those big hiring needs, texting is going to be more and more a piece of that's necessary, right? We're all at home. I don't know about you, but if you look around your desk, I don't have a phone sitting here. I have my mobile device actually sitting right in my lap, because I'm expecting a plumber to call me, and I wish they had actually texted me. So I have it sitting right in my lap right now, because if I have to take a phone call, it's going to be really awkward in the middle of this presentation. So we know it's the most effective way to reach out. So why not be using that for across your business needs, and using a provider that's going to help there. Travel nursing, as we all knew with COVID hitting, saw huge growth. And from the customers I've spoken with, they're continuing to see that, as especially right now with the vaccination process throughout the country, it's going to see huge growth there. Conversational messaging too. We actually had a really good call with one of our large financial customers this week. We did our quarterly business review, and they have something like a 50% growth increase that they're hiring for right now. They have over 100 internal recruiters at this firm, and they're expecting a massive growth period. They actually reached back out today and said, hey, we're going to hire an additional 20 internal recruiters just for this growth phase that we see coming up right now. So seeing big growth within those sectors, let alone as some of these big government projects go through. So see a lot of hiring trends throughout the country here. So again, the big piece there is speed to market. An interesting part about text, I actually had a question come from one of our vendors the other day. Can I respond to your text from Outlook? If they came in, they got their email notification. I said, you can't. You do get a link where you can click on it and open up our platform, but why would you want to wait till you got an email to respond to a text? Text on average is responded to in 90 seconds. Email on average is responded to in 90 minutes. We all expect that quick conversation. And there's a HubSpot stat, you respond to a lead in the first 5 minutes, you're 9 times more likely to close that deal. So it's really ensuring like your business is using this across all spectrums, not just your recruiting, not just sales. Use it for customer service, for billing, you name it. Use it for scheduling appointments, like a plumber coming to your house. So there's a lot of ways you can start using text across those different spectrums of your business.
Well, thanks everybody for sitting through that and paying attention so attentively. I challenge you guys to now use this as a conversation starter or small talk over the course of your weekend. And with that, we'll move to Q&A.
And I've been trying to do my best to answer as many of the questions that have come in through this. One of the quick questions is this presentation for existing customers or potential? Yeah, anyone who's registered for the webinar will be sharing the recording of the webinar out after the webinar once it's completed. I know there was one from Holly earlier. I think we answered it, but it's around the opt-outs, around protecting yourselves legally. Yeah, it's something we're going to pay close attention to around managing those opt-outs. Again, like I said before, where opt-outs could affect your throttling, you could see higher blocks. I mean, they'll start to flag as soon as a 1% opt-out now. And if you see like a 5% opt-out, you can see those really high block rates like we talked about. So something we're building into our algorithm as well is if we start seeing higher opt-outs, do we slow down how we're sending out those messages to ensure customers don't get blocked? Because the worst thing we could happen for us is you get blocked using our platform. So it's really important for us to ensure that deliverability. And it's important when you look at other platforms that are out there that they're doing the same thing. Is that built into their technology? Are they actually doing that? Or are they saying, oh, we manage it for you, but they're not actually doing anything around their sending speed of it as well? One question came from Chris, asked, will your rep notify you? Absolutely. I think I mentioned the question earlier. So we're starting to slowly beta test or bring customers through the process. Right now, it's very manual. We will be automating a lot of this. So we'll start doing drips out. Our goal is to collect all the information prior to those June dates, because after June, we'll have a 30-day, at some point in that period of 30-day, we have to register all the businesses. So we're going to be going through this process. We're almost finished with our full process to make sure all of your information is private as well. So we're not sharing out your tax EIN to all of every one of our employees. We're going to guard those types of information so it's not readily available, just like if it was a social security number.
Yeah, one of the reasons why the hard registration deadline got pushed out is the SMS ecosystem needs to add to their existing APIs. Like we use multiple SMS providers, but the one that's probably best known is Twilio. And Twilio's they've been really good. They've been very forthcoming with their communications. But some of the things that Twilio, they need to make some tweaks in their ecosystem too. Like we talked about the campaign ID to phone number matching. Like they've got to implement, that's real technology that they've got to go implement. And they've got to expose that kind of functionality in their API. So in addition to the campaign registry rolling out a whole stack really for registering, the SMS providers actually have to roll out some new tech as well and expose it to us in their API. And so that's, as soon as we get that, we're on top of it, we're testing it. But just know that under the covers for us to automate that, that's really what we're waiting on. And we've got a very good and active dialogue going on. So as soon as we can validate the APIs, test them, we'll roll them out to our customers so that we can do the automated form of registration versus the manual, which, as we discussed before, actually, is going to make things a lot better, we think, for our customers.
There's one question from Angela, asked about, as a company with 38 branches, if one branch is rated negatively, will it affect the entire company? It depends on how you're registered. If you look at a franchise model, we could potentially go the route of registering every franchise separately. Disadvantage is you're not as big then, right? With 38 branches, you're generally seen as a larger organization, which means higher throughput. But yeah, it could potentially, if you were associated with other branches, it could potentially negatively affect you. Again, we'll do our best as a provider to prevent that from happening. And it's something that part of that will come along with the education piece of this as well. Like what's changed, right? What are those red flags? Do we exceed X that we should be watching for? And I think that plays into Claudia's question next, which is, will someone be training us on how to do this? It's going to be built into the TAC. We'll train and we'll have a very step-by-step process. And any provider you work with, whether it's TextUs or any other providers out there, make sure they do that. And some I've seen emails come out from other providers like, hey, we're going to do this all on your behalf. That's great. But if they get those use cases wrong, or if they get this wrong, you could lose throughput. You could get flagged easier with this. So we're really automating this process. We've been mapping out on the back end for our providers on how each one of our businesses line up to what we see best fits their use cases down to the exact text messages that they're sending.
Yeah, there's like we mentioned, we do QBRs before with our customers. So there's regular transfer best practices there. There's a pretty good chance that this webinar actually becomes a series where we can just get out to folks, in very broad stroke fashion and just share the latest in terms of what we're seeing and hearing, so that you guys have it in live fashion through the webinar. You've got it recorded and you can go back to it. But for sure, we'll be sharing out those insights and training in various training formats going forward, definitely.
One question, and Martin, I don't know this piece. Angela asks, if flagged, is there a period of time to redeem yourself? What's that block look like? I know now on the current circumstances, it varies, right? You might get blocked for an hour, then 24 hours, then a week, and then a month. My assumption is the carriers would do something similar, but I'll let you answer that, Martin.
You know, I don't think we'll really know until we get into it. But I would tell you that the carriers don't, you know, some things are pretty unilateral if they're, you know, if there's a pretty really like a blatant breach of compliance here. But if you're acting in good faith, I would say that there is an audience among the carriers. If something happens, you know, they'll listen, and there are avenues for like special reviews as well. So you know, there's a little bit of hope here where you can get an audience, but you know, realistically, some of this will have to play out once this goes live. Any other questions in the queue?
I think I typed out the rest of them there real quick while you're going through that.
Well, you guys have been great. Really appreciate the Q&A, because that honestly makes it a bit more fun for us, and it definitely keeps us on our toes. Appreciate you guys spending a part of your Friday with us. We really hope that this has been valuable. If you've got other questions after this, please follow up with us directly. You can reach out to any of us on the webinar, you know, or your account manager or customer care, and we'd be happy to help you. You guys have a great weekend, and we look forward to being in touch with you.
Thank you, everyone.